It's time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast.
So on this week's episode, we're going to discuss how sort of the classic rock sound that everybody knows and a lot of people really love from like the 70s, 80s, I mean, even 90s and the 60s, it's sort of been very omnipresent. But then there's this assumption that like that classic rock sound gets overtaken by a lot of the other subgenres like indie and metal, and it sort of fades away a bit as it gets into the 2000s, although there are notable bands sort of carrying the flag. But the real point that I think when you actually listen through some of the bands is that it's sort of that classic rock sort of sound, the way that all the chords and the songwriting sort of works with the attitude, seems to be almost more prevalent than ever, but it's just not labelled as classic rock. Some great examples of this that I have noticed is bands like Ghost, particularly songs like Spillways, where they actually get like Joe Elliott from Def Leppard to feature on it because it's that much of like a nod in that direction. There's also Mammoth WVH, which is just really, really fantastic. This is Eddie Van Halen's son Wolfgang, and it's just incredible, like basically like classic rock, even though it's not on the surface, it may not look like classic rock, but when you actually listen to songs like Distance, that it screams like classic rock, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think also just the general rock sound has been skewed over the decades. So you have a lot of people who like, say, like U2 is a classic rock band, but obviously U2 pioneer a lot of things that created like the next few decades
of like indie and
alternative, and the things that Edge did and the way that they constructed the song sort of like pushed people to go into a less like, say, riff solo driven environment and more of like a mood sort of soundscape environment. And yeah, I suppose when you listen to a song like Distance, it almost has all those sort of good U2 elements, but then you have that classic rock backbone in the production and the guitar work. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, because like as you say, it's weird because U2 is a band that definitely in our thoughts they are classic rock, but they also become not classic rock. They define a modern rock sound that is not like it's not the same, is it? It's a completely different approach. Because you're relying, instead of relying on like big chords and like distortion and stuff, like a lot of U2 songs are clean. A lot of them rely on heavy amounts of delay for syncopated rhythms and stuff, and a lot of them as well, like particularly when you get to like Pop and Achtung Baby, they're sort of coming from a different world in terms of like pop production and dance and stuff. So even though I would still say like U2 are a quintessential classic rock band, on paper they're not really, are they?
Yeah, because they don't fall into those tropes that bands like Van Halen and like, you know, any of the 80s hair metal bands to the 70s classic rock bands like Boston and Foreigner, they don't seem to hit those like expectations, like we say, you know, big riffs and solos. U2 has riffs, but the riffs aren't the same like chuggy and kind of riffs.
The solos definitely aren't the same. The way Edge punctuates solos, you would not expect to hear like a Eddie Van Halen or Brian May or anything like that. I mean, even like Jimmy Page, and I think Edge is inspired by Jimmy Page, but he doesn't play like that, does he? He plays in a very unique manner, which then you hear people like Coldplay then come off of, and a lot of other bands sort of interpret the way U2 structure songs, which is one of the, I would say, is one of the big divides. And there's probably other players involved, but U2 definitely act as like a catalyst in that change from what like you say, like classic rock being like bands like Boston and Queen and like Creedence Clearwater Revival, this more rooted in sort of the blues and rooted in rock and roll. It changes to being more rooted in like almost like pop And I mean, you hear it like even in bands like Walk the Moon list, like U2ism.
Yeah, you could almost call it like a U2ism in music, like when they do certain sort of stylings and certain phrases, and it's like you say, it's things like, say, With or Without You, you know, the
it's dancing.
build,
the
build up to the fake out not solo is what a lot of people sort of like emulate. It's almost like its own version. You like it's a archetype of song, like say I Want You, She's So Heavy by the Beatles, where people will reference that specific song countless times.
Yeah.
And With or Without You is one of those types of songs where people will say, let's do, literally some people will just do the chord progression.
Well, it's 1-5-6-4, I believe, and then there's a lot of dancing about on the sort of suspended sort of run, where you go from like suspended fourth to the third to the suspended second of one of the chords, normally one of the chords that the first or the fifth or something, that is harmonically like very pleasing. Because I mean, the reason why they do it, and again we say that City of Angels by 30 Seconds to Mars,
great example.
Prime example of a band doing that U2ism, and that it works because it works. It harmonically, it sounds fantastic, especially with clean guitars and delays and stuff, or lightly crunched guitars. It really does work. And back to sort of the centre of why I was saying that there's this break, where, because obviously classic rock is classic rock for a reason. It is a lot less common now to hear that sound set, those movements and that overall sort of feeling. Whereas I do feel like, obviously, there's bands that are the exception to the rule. Bands like The Darkness.
Yeah.
Bands like The Struts, which are a sort of a newer version, really, of what The Darkness does, where they're on that classic rock bandwagon. But I'm not talking about the bands that are, like, trying to be classic rock. I'm just talking about, like, just bands that are out there.
So you're saying like there's a division as well in revival rock bands and just rock bands trying to do cutting edge music
that then starts to sound like classic rock. Because like the Struts and The Darkness, they are deliberately trying to be that revival.
They're paying homage to those bands that they like say Thin Lizzy for The Darkness and Queen sort of mixed together
for both.
Or say Greta Van Fleet is sort of like paying homage to Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
So I've heard. I don't really listen to Greta Van Fleet,
but they definitely do. Though.
They definitely do.
But like, whereas what I'm saying is like you hear like John Mayer, and he's doing this like on Wild Blue. He's doing this Dire Straits thing, and it's in places you don't expect. I know John Mayer's like not a brand new artist, but he definitely, he's a lot newer than, I mean, a lot of the classic rock bands, if you know what I mean. Like, we're not necessarily talking about bands like Winger doing like brand new albums and stuff, because the interesting thing when classic rock bands continue, similarly to, I mean, U2 and Bon Jovi are great examples of this, they change. Like, they don't sound like they did in the 80s, and that's the same with bands like Europe, where they do albums like Last Look at Eden, and it's fantastically forward thinking, but it sounds like Europe, but it doesn't sound like Europe in the 80s.
There's also like a common thing with a lot of classic rock bands where they'll push the envelope, they'll get more and more forward thinking to a point, and then they rein it right back to classic sort of sounds.
Yes.
And like Europe with Last Look at Eden's a great example of that. They seem to be pushing this incredibly like modern sound, and then they went back to organs and sort of like that bluesy roots sort of thing, and went, but I would love to see like a Last Look at Eden 2 sort of style album.
I would as well.
Because like you say, it's like what is the next sort of form of rock, like, because it keeps getting sort of like capped off and then sort of or discontinued or morphing into a different genre as opposed to its original
in such an aggressive way, a bit like the way a lot of the metal that comes to mind being like Pop Evil and Bring Me the Horizon, where they are doing very, very extreme production and fascinating stuff, but you would not call that a continuation of classic rock in any sense, because it is metal. It's completely different, and it's very modern metal. But some examples, in my opinion, of this classic rock sound sort of bleeding into modern bands, but not revival bands, not in ways that are obvious, are overcome by Nothing But Thieves, with the massive guitar solo, the chords and everything. It's got that memorable chorus.
It's got that arena rock feel to it that has you just like you say, the combination of the tempo, the way the guitar solo is structured, and then
the actual
all the
songwriting as well. Like the message of the song is just to overcome, to be better. And that's a very classic rock sentiment. You know, it's not classic rock lyrically doesn't tend to talk about feelings as much. You know, it's not.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of modern rock does. And another example of this classic rock thing is like you hear bands like The Strike doing this really big like 80s like rock pop thing that is really like accurate, but again they're just bubbling about. I don't believe that they're any sort of revival band, but they're popular because they do this sound and they do it to such a degree that it's got like a classic fan base essentially.
So where would you say the 1975 sit in this argument?
Honestly, it depends on the song. So definitely, like when you think about songs like
Oh Caroline, for example.
Oh Caroline, Happiness. I mean, Oh Caroline's a great example of this exact thing. Again,
like
the
Toto style of music.
And they're not, I would not call the 1975 a revival band. They may draw a lot from the 80s in particular, but you hear songs like I Like America and America Likes Me, and obviously a lot of the songs at the end of Notes are extremely forward-thinking and really throughout Notes, on a conditional form, that is, for anybody who doesn't listen regularly. But the 1975 are very guilty of doing this classic rock sound and just having it be like a pop song, and it's songs that get played on radio as well. But it is that classic rock thing. But nobody would call the 1975 a classic rock band.
Because they're leaning more towards the radio singles that bands like Toto and Foreigner put out, where it's more about the song and less about the guitar. Like, say, Africa by Toto. People say it's a classic rock song. The song's not really a classic rock song. It's a song by a classic rock band. Like, there is no chuggy guitars. There's no massive guitar solo. Most of it's done on the keyboards for Africa.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's that sort of argument, I would say, because obviously, like, the 1975 draw a lot from 80s pop as well as 80s rock. But like you say, when you think about If You're Too Shy, it is more like that sort of arena rock sound set, but obviously played by those bands like Starship, where there was relying on synth basses, and sort of like it skews it from being what you would say, what you could argue is classic rock, to classic sort of 80s pop.
Yeah, but it's as you say, it's weird because they bleed together in such a way where you want to be able to say that a band like Starship and a band like Toto are different, but they're really, when you put them down on paper, they're very, very similar.
Yeah, because this is the argument with Genesis. Invisible Touch, people would argue, well, it's Genesis, it's a rock song. It's not a pop song.
But everything
it's a
about
rock
it
song.
Screams pop.
Yeah, because it's the orientation of the entire production is very like, you know, electronic drums, synth bass, sort of just a smattering of guitars that really aren't carrying Invisible Touch at all. Catchy chorus. And once again, Genesis are a rock band doing pop songs in the 80s. Therefore, it's classic rock, not classic pop, because they're a rock band doing pop music.
I suppose the real dilemma, and this is why people keep trying to say genre is dead, is because how can you police what one genre is? I mean, the actual walls of the genres are so blurred, but you can still draw comparisons, because at the end of the day, all music is comparable, even if they are genreless. Even if the band's like, yeah, I'm a genreless artist, I don't really deal in any sound. You can listen to their single and derive a sound from it. Like, you can say, well, obviously you may not use a genre, but it definitely sounds like New Jack Swing or like hip hop or trap or whatever. So it's an interesting thing. I mean, Taylor Swift is another great example of this, because like on Speak Now, Taylor's version, it is very like country rock pop, like all the way through. There's a lot of guitars, distorted vocals. The songs are all played by bands, which is a lot more, it sounds really silly, but it's a lot more of a rock approach than a lot of the rock bands who tend to make, you know, songs on computers.
Let's say like Madness by Muse, for example.
Yeah.
With all the touch strip, electronic
you
guitars
compare
and stuff.
that, which is equivocally like a massive stadium rock band, to Taylor Swift, who is, you know, we all know she's a pop artist, but she's ultimately derives from country. You compare that to Speak Now, and by comparison, Speak Now is way more rock than Muse would be.
Yeah.
Which is a weird comparison.
Particularly if you say using The Second Law as an example, where you have, say, Follow You or Me.
Follow Me.
Follow Me.
Great song.
Big Freeze, and then say, like I say, Madness. They're sort of not pulling. They're in a rock. The actual compositions are very rock, but the sound design is very electronically forward.
Yes, and Muse again very guilty of using U2isms, particularly on Madness. I'd say on Big Freeze as well.
Yeah, 100%.
And I mean, follow Me. Literally, the end is.
Like the U2,
it is a U2ism is the end. I mean, this is all gonna be like trying to coin U2ism as a musicology term.
Yeah.
I think it should be. I think there's merit to that, and if we do a question, it will be: should we use the term U2ism to describe?
Because the thing is, like we say with U2, is U2 get a bad rap because they're a very popular band, and a lot of people like them. And when a lot of people like a band, a lot of people are vocally not too happy about that band because they get fed up of seeing them. It's like that, you know. Everybody always roots for the underdog. You always want the people who are at the top to lose, don't you? You know, that's like, it's almost human psychology to an extent. So yeah, you see bands like say Nickelback, Imagine Dragons, and U2. They get put in the same boat, even though they're massively popular bands with huge fan bases. They get a lot of specifically online hate, or like, you know, snobby music store hate.
I mean,
because
I would say in like just shy of 1989 coming out, I definitely think that's how a lot of people talked about Taylor Swift.
Yeah, 100%.
She's in band here. She hasn't crossed to England properly yet. Well, you know, nobody listens to her. But you was like, well, somebody must, because I know obviously 1989 came out and it was a different story after that. But it'd be interesting, since obviously we was exposed to her in the UK, where she's, you know, nowhere near as well known in her early albums as she will have been in America and maybe other regions. It'd be interesting to see if that was a different experience in America.
Well, yeah, because whenever an artist switches genre, they'll lose a percentage of their original fan base, and that's the problem that a lot of, say, like coming back to classic rock, a lot of classic rock bands didn't want to incorporate disco or synth elements because they didn't want to be branded a disco band, and disco and rock was feuding at the time. And you know, you have songs like I Was Made for Loving You by Kiss.
It's a disco song.
It's a disco song by a rock band, therefore it is a classic rock song.
Yeah.
As far as a playlist is concerned.
Yeah. It's,
do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like, it's a weird...
It makes you stop and think, because you go, well, what's more important, the song and the band? But I would argue the band is the marketing, and so the band defines the genre. So even if it is a disco song, it's by a rock band. So yeah, it's a rock song. So that's bizarre in itself. I mean, how many... I suppose this may be more applicable with some of the pop artists, say like Michael Jackson, Prince, Elton John, people like that, who are more musical shapeshifters in that sense. and there's a lot of people who occupy that space. You wouldn't say, if they do a certain album, you wouldn't say it was a set genre because of who they are. But definitely with bands, you do.
Now, the thing with Kiss is because of the way Kiss look, you look at Kiss doing a disco song and they look like a rock band with all the makeup and
Yes.
the massive axe guitars and all the black. So obviously you're going to say, well, the song doesn't really matter. I'm looking at a rock band playing
Yes.
a disco song
Yeah.
with guitars. Therefore, it's still a rock band. Do you know what I'm saying?
So-
Like with this comparison.
Yeah, but do you think that this comparison is limited to groups? Because if a group like Little Mix did a rock album, people would probably still say, well, it's probably not a rock album, it's
Well-
pop. But if Miley Cyrus, which she did on Electric Hearts, was it electric or elastic?
I feel like it was Plastic Hearts.
Plastic?
Yeah,
Do we need
Plastic
to,
Hearts.
I will check
Now,
this.
whilst you're looking at it, I was going to say Demi Lovato, she is redoing a lot of her classics, like Sorry Not Sorry, featuring Slash from Guns N' Roses. She is literally doing rock versions of her songs.
Now that is different. Now, we'll just jump back to Miley Cyrus. Sorry, it is Plastic Hearts, just to check. Couldn't remember. That was my brain there. But would most people call that a rock album or a pop album? I would argue this is very close to where Dolly Parton is as well, with her new album.
Yeah.
Would you call it a rock album or a pop album? I don't know. I feel like I would call it, I want to think of it as a pop album, but from the songs I've heard, I'd still probably go for pop album, wouldn't you? Even though it's marketed as a rock album.
Because she is using a lot of rock feel and stuff, but at the end of the day, it's still coming from a pop background. And
Is this where the mixing makes all the difference?
Well, yeah,
Obviously it's
because
mixed as a pop artist.
The thing is when you're a solo singer, definitely from a fan, from say an audience perspective, right? The way the music gets mixed has a lot to do with it. Say Prisoner by Miley Cyrus and Dua Lipa, right? The guitars are way back in the mix.
They are.
And that makes a massive difference. They are there, they are present, but the bass is a lot louder, the drums are a lot louder, and the vocals are a lot louder. And that is the difference. Even though that album has the rock attitude, the rock image, all the album cover, all the music videos, they're trying to say this is a rock album. Your brain, when you hear the songs, the way they're mixed, is telling you this is
It's
a
pop.
poppy rock
Yeah.
album, but it's mainly a pop album with rock influences. And that's all to do with the dynamic of the mix. It's like shoegaze. Like I'm looking at Amnesia by M83, and the thing with shoegaze is that it sounds like shoegaze because you can't hear anything. You just
Yeah, 'cause of
hear
the way it's
everything.
mixed.
You hear everything all the time, and it's murky, and you're having to search for where does the guitars end and the keyboards start. Do you know what I mean? That's the thing. That's what makes it sound like shoegaze, and that's why mixing is so integral to the way the genres are. That a lot of the rock bands, they can't do a sincere piano ballad if they tried.
Yes,
because the guitar and
changes.
the band come in, and then it
Well, I
changes
would
the full direction.
Say a great example of this, Cry Like Boys Like Girls. The guitar is in the mix for maybe 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It completely shifts the tone of the song.
Yeah.
It comes across, even though it's all a very sincere, like vocal piano ballad, and because of the singer's range in Boys Like Girls, it's like really comes across as it could go either way. But
Yeah.
when that band section comes in, you go, no, this is definitely a rock band.
Yeah, because it's the way it's mixed as well as the way it's played.
Because the way that's mixed, the guitars punch you in the face, as do the drums. Like there's no getting around it.
It's the same way, like we talk about with festival performance. When you have a singer, a pop singer, and they've got a session cat band who do the same type of, big session drum fills and stabs and
they play
that
everything
big
on lead
intro,
guitar.
and it's all done in the same way as any other. It could be Jason Derulo, could be anybody. The band, they're so good at playing that you almost forget that they're there, because they always have the same. I don't know whether it's the way session musicians get taught, or whether it's just the standards to prove that they are so good at what they do that they can hit like a triple fill, miss the one, everybody hit it on the two or whatever, and then you go to the big finish. It's just that sort of thing. You know, you always hear the same type of drum fills, guitar solos, and just general stuff from session bands. Whereas if you have an actual unit band, this don't play like that.
No, they tend to be. A lot of them will be sloppier, but it's not sloppy in terms of poor technique. It's more attitude that comes across,
and playing style, individual playing style,
uniqueness.
Because session musicians have to be so versatile that they can play anything, but they're so good that it's almost like a detractor for the personality of the band.
Yes,
because it sounds like a silly thing, really, but they have to be able to dial in whatever they need to do. And they tend to, like I say, just from my observations, when you watch, say, festival performances, the solo singers, backing bands tend to all do that same type of arrangement, regardless of who it is, and whether the song, it could be Stormzy, and they'll still do it, because we've seen it, like they're on award shows, they still do that same style of thing. And that's like when a rock band go up, say like when Red Hot Chili Peppers go up on an award show, they just sound like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They don't sound like anybody else, because that's the way they play together.
It's very true. I do know what you're saying. And
this also goes into that rock sound, that classic rock sound, is that typically bands will have a way of playing, and even if they swap out two of the members of the band, it still sounds like that band for the most part. I mean, there's only one example I can think of with Tom Petty. They specifically wanted a drummer who played a different feel entirely.
Yes.
So obviously the albums after the original drummer left have a slightly different feel.
Would you say, though, that this same argument applies to a band like 30 Seconds to Mars?
Which part of the argument?
The fact that they can swap members out or lose members and it still sounds like them. I mean, I would argue it still does sound like 30 Seconds to Mars, but it also sounds like they've completely changed genres. But I would argue that when you're listening to like the new songs, like Get Up Kid and Life is Beautiful, ultimately you can still hear that band like in there.
Yeah, and once again, when they play live, they don't have session musicians doing those session musician things, because it still sounds like that band, and they don't have any. They just have it. We're assuming all on tracks.
Well, there's one guy doing something, but there's definitely some tracks involved.
But like I say, once again, all speculation. We don't know. We're just speculating. We're just talking about things we notice and things, like common trends you'll see when, say, seeing bands on festivals or listening to music in general. You can only draw comparisons from what other people have done. But it's just one of those things where that's why I think a lot of those pop singers doing rock albums, it doesn't feel like a traditional rock album, because at the end of the day, they've got a bunch of people in to play a certain way, but then right at the end of the chain, typically whoever mixes it will mix it in more of a pop form factor.
Definitely.
For radio, and then that's what changes the genre. Even though you might be able to change the fader layout, turn the guitars up, turn the keyboards down or whatever, and suddenly it sounds like a rock track.
I mean, I would say a skilled enough mixer could take any set of stems and with additional bits of production, flip it into any genre, because that's what people do, isn't it? That's how you end up with these albums. I mean, a lot of the bands go into the studio and then they're like, well, I've got this song, and they play it on a guitar and it comes out and there's no guitar in it. You know, it completely changes. And I suppose that's the skill of mixing and songwriting. And that's what defines, I suppose, artists who see themselves in a box and artists who don't see themselves in that box. Like we say about being more open to genre experimentation. I'm sure when Maroon 5 go into the studio, they don't say, well, we need to be able to go out and play this exactly the same live. They don't care. I mean, they probably can play it live because they're that well versed at playing like pop and
also
stuff.
The tools are there, whereas when Queen was in the studio to replicate that live, they didn't have like time code syncs on all the lighting shows and every single backing track, you know. But Queen could play Bohemian Rhapsody now if there was, say, in their peak, say like 80s Queen or whatever, playing now, they could have everything on clicks, all the opera on the backing tracks, whereas they felt like they couldn't do that. But maybe that's because they didn't want to rely on tape machines.
Well, I think it's because it was less common. So if they went and did that bit on a backing track, people would have probably thrown cans at them and stuff
and said, you know, you're not performing.
Yeah, you're fake, because it's just more accepted now, and that's the main difference. I mean, one of the main examples I can think of is when they talk about Baba O'Reilly, them having that keyboard on a backing track.
And it always going wrong and having the tape machine throwing out the engineer and stuff because it always went wrong.
Well,
basically.
Technology just didn't there. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to rely on the tape machine, especially not if you're doing massive venues.
Yeah, once again, tape has flutter and wow,
yeah,
and it moves, and if you're drumming to that tape, it's not going to be on the grid, as you would say, so it's going to fluctuate, and then you need, like say Keith Moon did, headphones, gaffer tape to your forehead to make sure that you can hear what the tape machine's doing, and then it's just very clunky, or it was when they was doing like that live.
When they talked about it, I believe it's on a classic albums they talk about it, and yeah, it's tough. Well, that's been our conversation, originally about classic rock, but more about genre in general. Do you agree or disagree?
You know, I think we've covered some interesting sort of generalizations that I think a lot of people have when they listen to music or just when they watch like a live performance. And yeah, let us know what you think in the Q&A and everything.
Right, I've been Peter.
And I've been Mark.
Thanks for listening.